In this episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, fishing, and I mean all kinds of fishing, from big old catfish to largemouth bass in that 8-pound range, and a guy who's done it and manages it statewide and knows all about it. He's Jerry Brown, Fisheries Bureau Director here at Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
This is the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm Matt Wyatt, and we are talking fishing today with Fisheries Bureau Director Jerry Brown. Jerry?
Hey, Matt.
Howdy.
How are you?
Doing great. Good to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a chance for me to get to talk to somebody who knows a lot more about something I love than I do.
Like to fish.
Fishing. And I know for you, I was kind of doing a little research, you know, and we'll get into it. You're obviously here at the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks and been a part of the agency for a long time. But if you take me back to little Jerry, where you came up and where you came from, what led to you kind of being here and having a love for the outdoors and for fishing? Where'd that all start? Well,
it's funny you said little Jerry because that's what I went by most of my life.
Is that right?
A teenager, because my dad's name is Jerry as well, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, I grew up on a farm in Amite County, right on the banks of the Homachita River, and we always had a pond there. My grandmother loved to fish, so she would go down to the pond. We had a preacher and his wife, and they all just liked to go down and spend the afternoons at the pond. So, you know, I would tag along, and he loved to bass fish, and he introduced me to a spinnerbait, and that's all it took. So we would fish a lot there at the house, and me and my dad would fish some in the river. It's kind of how I got started hunting and fishing.
Yeah. All right. So Amite County, you say river. What river are we talking about?
The Homachita River.
Homachita River.
It's right in the northwest corner of the county.
So when y'all would go and he would take you as a kid, what kind of fishing are you doing?
In the river, it was mostly catfish. We would set some trot lines, catching flatheads or channel cat. In the pond, of course, it was mainly bass and brim. So starting off with a cane pole and a cork and a cricket or worm catching brim. Then, like I said, with a spinnerbait, catching bass. There was one stump out in the middle of the pond, and it was your goal to cast your lure as close to that stump as you could get, because that's where the fish were. So even back then, we knew what fish attractors were, even though we wasn't putting them out. So.
You knew what they were and what that target was.
We knew they held the fish.
You know, and your story of, you know, here you are, and it's a career for you, fisheries biologist and wildlife fisheries and parks. But it starts with somebody introduced you to the sport, put a rod and reel in your hand, and the first time that cork goes under, the first time you feel that tug, you're hooked the rest of your life. That story repeats itself over and over, even today, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it really wasn't until college. You know, I was one of those that kind of had several different majors before I figured out what I wanted to do. But we took a field ecology course, a stream ecology course, and we went to Missouri. And we were, you know, running seines and getting crawfish and fish and keying them out, different things up there. And I told my professor, I'm like, you know, this would be really cool to do something like this for a living. He's like, well, you know, you can. And from then on, this is what I wanted to do. So I was very fortunate to go on that trip, learned a lot, got to experience sampling and a little fish biology out there, you know, right, not in a classroom, but out on the river. So we got to canoe and, you know, do a lot of that. So when I came back, the agency, we had a district office in Marigot, Mississippi at that time. And the department was leasing the building that was owned by Delta State, where I went. And so that's how the connection was made. And he asked them, could they use an intern? And so I came in, I think I was in my junior year at college. And so I came in as an intern for a few months and then just kind of slowly made its way up over the last 26 plus years.
Yeah. Jerry, how would you describe for you, you kind of gave us a clue there, but how would you describe for you, you get into a career that is something you genuinely love? Not everybody, I don't know that everybody has that or gets to go through that in their life, but for you, any outdoors, hunting, fishing, and then to to find a way as a young person that this is going to lead to a career for you? How do you describe sort of how important, how integral that was for your life?
Well, it was great. Like I said, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I started out in pre-vet till I got into all the chemistries.
Okay.
And then I switched over to business till I got too much accounting. And it's like, can I picture myself just sitting there doing, certain things? But I was outdoors. I started off kind of assisting the fisheries biologists up there in the Delta. So my first day, I was coming out of the cafeteria at college, and the game warden truck pulls up with a boat behind it, and I'm looking at everybody going to get in the truck, So I was kind of the envy. So it was kind of like I was very proud, So from then on, especially being a biologist, you never knew what you were going to do. So it was seasonal. Some months we're out in the field on a lake or on the river. Other months we may be interviewing anglers at the lake to see what they're catching, doing pond checks. I always enjoyed meeting landowners and property owners that were trying to manage their ponds, because I've never been too shy. So being able to talk to them, especially farmers.
Yeah.
But it's a great experience for me early on in my career to get to do that, and so it's been great.
Sure. Now, where'd you go to high school?
Pine Hills Academy in Gloucester, Mississippi.
Okay, in Gloucester,
Yep.
Mississippi. Isn't that where Britney Spears is from? Didn't she come from Gloucester?
Close to there.
Or close to there, right?
I think she's out from Liberty or Gillsburg area.
Yeah, so somewhere in that area. And then to Delta State. Mm-hmm. Okay.
First at Southwest Community College in Summit.
In Summit.
So I went there for 2 years, and I got a job at Yellowstone National Park for the summer. Right after that, my last semester there. So in between Southwest and Delta State, I got to go to Yellowstone. And so spending the whole summer there with that as your backyard was a great experience. I was going to ask you, what's that like? For a 20-year-old kid that had hardly been out of Mississippi. It was great. Just kind of open your eyes to what all's out there.
Yeah.
And so really cool.
Well, and I didn't know ahead of time that you'd gone to Southwest Community College for a couple of years. But it's appropriate because we got the Southwest mascot.
The bear was there, I remember.
Right over my shoulder,
yeah.
The Bears. So Delta State, and then went to work for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
Like I said, I started as an intern, and shortly after that, I was able to come on as what they used to call a general service employee. It was just, they paid you a little bit for working there. So I did that, and then I became a lake manager. It was Lake Charlie Caps in Bolivar County. Okay. Now it's the Charlie Caps WMA. But while I was there, my dad really encouraged me to stay in school. It's like, it's right down the road. Why not? Mm-hmm. So I went ahead and went to graduate school. And at that time, our fisheries biologist position required a master's degree. And so I was really glad I did, because that opened doors for me to become a biologist. So I was up there until 2004, and then I came down and worked in the central region. So Ross Barnett over toward Okeechobee, working out of Turcotte as a fisheries biologist for 5 years. And then in 2009, I got to move back to the Southwest area to become the district biologist there. So I did that until I came to the office.
Came to the main office in Jackson, 2017.
17, correct. Yep.
So that has been a few years, even though for us it doesn't seem like that long ago.
It does not. I can't believe how fast time goes by.
Sure. You mentioned Ross Barnett. All right. Tell me about something I read about you. You did a study over a pretty good period of time at Ross Barnett with hand grabbers who hand grab for catfish.
Correct.
How did that come about?
Well, I was looking for a project to do that I could publish. And so we knew that there was a lot of people that hand grab for catfish at Barnett. But whenever we do our what we call creel surveys, that's where we're basically interviewing the anglers when they come off the water to see what they're fishing for, how many they caught, what size are they catching. We do that each spring. But hand grabbing season is from May 1st through July 15th. And so we were not capturing that information.
Okay.
And so somebody just kind of, we got to talking and like, well, we ought to interview those because we don't look at that. And the more I looked into it, there was just very little research nationwide on hand grabbing. Of course, they call it noodling or hogging, depending on what part of the country you're in. And so we started that, and it was a 2-year study where we went out in boats and we basically just pulled up to where they were hand grabbing, stopped, and they came over and we asked them a series of questions. They brought us their fish, we weighed them and measured them, and so it was a really neat study. And I was able to go to St. Louis and present that information at a seminar and publish that work in a journal. So it was an accomplishment, but it was very interesting.
Sure. Well, and over 2 years, so May to July study for 2 seasons, basically.
That's correct.
What were some of the findings, notable things that came out of that study?
We looked at party size, and I think it averaged 4 people, so we knew it was more of a group event. It wasn't something like bass fishing where a lot of times it's just you and your or one partner. It's always a group. A lot of friends or families go out. Flathead catfish were the predominant one that people wanted to catch, which makes sense because flatheads is, no matter how big they get, they're still good to eat. Where your blues, once they get really big, some people don't like them quite as much. But it was mainly flatheads, blue catfish, and some channels, but mostly blues and flathead. Most of them were wading in about waist deep water, and they would have structures out there, whether it was artificial or natural structures, mostly artificial in Barnett. So like wooden boxes were placed. Most of them used what we call a probe, some sort of stick. So you can't have a hook or anything on it to catch the fish, but they would stick their probe in there. So if the catfish was located in the back of the box, it would make them come toward the front of it so they could grab it. But it was just interesting things like that. Seeing what they were catching, what sizes of fish. We saw some 30 to 40 pound fish. So, and a neat thing about it, not only the study and just learning about it, a friend of mine that we did that project with, he used to hand grab. I had never been. So for about 3 or 4 years, we were really into it ourselves. So that was that was really cool.
I was going to ask you if you'd done it.
Yes, I think my largest was a 38-pound flathead.
Goodness,
which was a handful to say the least.
So a 38-pound flathead, and I've never done it. I'm wondering about the kind of strength and everything it takes to do that physically. You got to manhandle a 38-pound flathead. How difficult was it?
I thought it was going to be really difficult till he showed me how. So most of these structures have just a small enough opening that the catfish can swim in. So when you go up there, the first thing we would do is put our feet inside the hole. Once we found the structure, we would find the hole and put our legs right there in front of it so he couldn't swim out.
Okay.
Take a deep breath, go down, and put your arm in it, and your chest basically blocks the hole. And once you put your hand in, be ready because they're going to bite it, because they're protecting their, the nest there. So once you got them out, we put a rope through for a stringer, and it was
the rest is history.
It is.
And as they say, pictures to prove that it happened.
Absolutely.
That's really neat. And I wonder too, you mentioned that the man-made structure that is placed there versus natural for that type of activity. Right. Is that pretty much what you see around the state?
You do in Barnett. Now, some lakes, such as Oxbows, you may have some old cypress stumps or hollowed out trees that the catfish will get in. So, or there may be some cavities in stream banks. When I was a kid, I always heard my dad talking about like great uncles or going down to the river and grabbing big catfish, Yeah. So I'd heard about it pretty much all my life and never actually seen it done until then. But there'll be natural cavities in some streams like the Yazoo.
Yeah.
But in other lakes where there's not a lot of natural cavities, you're allowed to put out wooden structures so people to build boxes.
Okay. Has to be wooden?
It does now. Yeah, that regulation changed probably about 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay.
So you can't put out like hot water heaters, plastic barrels like, was once common.
Mm-hmm. How about that? You mentioned catfish too, as you were describing the difference, flathead and to the bigger blues. Total non sequitur. My brain jumps around, and I had this vision for a minute of the weigh-in that I saw part of this past year in Vicksburg for that big catfish tournament that came through there. Mm-hmm. I know you as a lifelong fisherman, we're familiar with bass tournaments, right? I've seen them, been a part of bass weigh-ins and everything, and it's great. It's awesome. Somebody holds a big 6-pound, 7-pound largemouth lunker. But when some of those guys at that Bill Dance catfish tournament in Vicksburg on the Mississippi River were weighing in 60 and 70 pound catfish.
You
and
don't hold two like that, do you?
one maybe, and they dropped one or two, and they had to pick them back up. You talk about a sight to see. That catfish weigh-in was something.
Yeah, and they get really big, especially those out on the river and in the oxbow lakes.
Yeah, I guarantee you. All right, another one I wanted to ask you about. So you had I read a little bit about the grabbing for catfish program. Sturgeon. You were a part of something on the Mississippi River regarding sturgeon that is fascinating to me. Tell me just a little bit about that.
That was a project in conjunction with the Fish and Wildlife Service. They were doing a study on the Mississippi River, and we had two teams from our agency. So I led the team that sampled in Vicksburg and Port Gibson. Another team sampled further north up around Greenville and Tunica. But we were basically running trot lines on the bottom of the river, catching sturgeon. Pallid sturgeon was what we were after, that and shovel nose. And we did that during the winter months, so it was quite chilly out there, but it was a really cool experience.
All right, pallid sturgeon and shovel nose. Which, and then by the name, we kind of can get what the major difference is. But how do you describe sort of specifically the difference?
A pallid sturgeon is threatened. It's an endangered species, so you can harvest those. A shovel-nosed sturgeon, they look so much alike that you can't harvest those either.
Okay.
So the Fish and Wildlife Service was trying to just gather data primarily on genetics and movement. So we got to sample them. So we would take trot lines, bait them with night crawlers, put them down on the bottom of the river, set them overnight, come back and pull the trot lines. And if they were large enough fish, we would actually insert what's called a sonnet tag in them. So I got to learn how to do sturgeon surgery at the same time, learn how to tie stitches. So we would put the sonnet tags in them, and they could track their movements. We have fish that we tagged in our area. They were finding them in Missouri. So it was really cool how much they actually
how far
moved.
they travel.
Right.
From here to Missouri. In what amount of time, I wonder?
Probably about a year or so.
Really?
Yeah.
So in a year's time,
they can really move.
They can really move.
Some were more stationary, but others, they went from New Orleans to St. Louis. So,
and y'all did that how many years?
I think we did that about 4 years.
Okay.
I think we
Every
started
winter.
that in maybe 2011, I believe, is when we started that. Yeah, we did it in the winter. We did it in the cooler months, easier on the fish. So we would have a large tank in the boat. We would be taking the fish off, put them in the live well basically until we ran that sample, and then we go pull up and work up the fish, take measurements and lengths. A lot of different types of data we took. So I'd heard of sturgeon. I knew that they were in the river. I just didn't realize how many were out there or a lot of information about them. So it was really a cool experience.
Size that you would catch when y'all were doing that?
If you go up to up in the Missouri River, up toward Montana, you're going to see huge fish, 20, 30, 40-pound fish on the pallets. Down here, we were seeing them more like 10 to 12, the big ones. I think the ones up there are what you would call the pure strain. Down here, what they were looking at was more hybrids, where they hybridize them with the shovel nose that's in the river. So I know we caught at least 3 that were pure pallids because they had what's called an elastomer in their rostrum. You could see it. It was pink or fluorescent like a chartreuse, and that's where they were stocked with hatcheries up north, and they had swam down.
How about that?
But it's really neat.
That really is neat.
And the reason they're protected, obviously the numbers on the pallet, but they're a primary source of caviar.
Right.
So that's why people want them.
I see. So as they say, follow the money there. That caviar is dollar signs. Well, and what's interesting about that is to think how many people who grow up in this part of the country, we either spend time on the river or fish on the river and may not ever realize that type of fish is right there in that fishery where they are. And maybe not even know that, or the numbers of them, like you said.
And unless you're just fishing the right way with the right bait, on the bottom, you may not know that because you think going to the river, you're thinking catfish or white bass or something like that.
Sure. So I would imagine too during that study. So if it was wintertime, trot lines on the bottom with night crawlers, you had to catch other things other than sturgeon as well.
We caught a lot of catfish as well, but we really caught a lot of sturgeon, compared to what we would have thought. But a lot of channel cat, a lot of blue cat. Didn't get many flathead, but you normally have to have live bait for catching them. So we did catch a few that had a smaller fish that had already been hooked. So
sure,
kind of doubled up on those.
See, and as you're telling those stories, I'm thinking about, again, little Jerry from Southwest Mississippi comes up and gets in a career where as part of his job, he gets to interview and study people hand grabbing for catfish at Ross Barnett, gets to run trot lines for sturgeon on the Mississippi River. I mean, and this is a job you get paid to do. I know it's there's no job where it's always, clouds and roses, but man, what a thing to do for a living.
Yep. It's been a great career. Like I said, my time as a biologist, one of the best things about that job is it was seasonal. And so you're not really doing the same thing. Of course, there's going to be report writing and analyzing the data that you collected. So yes, sitting at the computer doing that is not always fun, but it's part of it. But the rest of the time you're out there meeting people, meeting the anglers that are out there on the water, getting information from them, talking to them about what do they expect, what are they out there for, and just getting out in boats, and it's great.
Yeah, sure. So if you fast forward to now as Fisheries Bureau Director, how's that differ? How's that been a change for you in the day to day?
It took a little getting used to when I first came to the office, but after so many years, it's you kind of get used to what you were doing, so you're looking at something else. But it was more office. But luckily, when I first came up here, it was only like 2 or 3 days a week. So I got to still get out in the field. I came up here as a state lake coordinator. So we have 19 state fishing lakes across the state, and these are waters that we own and manage ourselves. So we staff those. We have lakes that range from probably like 60 to 70 acres up to about 800 acres down at Oklahoma. And so we manage those fisheries. We have a manager there. We have campgrounds. We have day use areas. So at least I got to get out and, visit with them. And of course I started out in that state lake program, so I was familiar with it. So that was nice. And then I think in 21, I moved into the director position. So
yeah, the state lake program. So 19 lakes statewide that you manage. How would you answer this question? The importance for recreationally for everyday outdoorsmen like myself. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and my friend who has a son and lives in South Tilla. They go to Lake Lamar Bruce. The importance of those lakes and how they're managed recreationally for the overall kind of health of outdoor sports in Mississippi. How can you speak to that?
Well, it's great that we can offer, fishing opportunities for the public, especially in places that may not have a lot. You're blessed up there in the Tupelo area. You have a lot of waters up there from Pickwick to Bay Springs and the Ten Tom. Other parts of the state may not have as many opportunities. So to be able to provide a state fishing lake that you can go with easy access, with a lot of bank access, got a lot of fishing piers if you don't have a boat. We got boat ramps if you do have a boat. So those are, like I said, intensely managed by our biologists, are limed often and fertilized. The fish population is sampled and stocked if needed. They put fish attractors out. Anything we can do to try to increase your success, we try to do that. So, it's great to offer that. And not only our state lakes that I mentioned, but many of our state parks also have lakes on them, like Trace up in your area, or Percy Quinn down in Macomb, or Paul B. Johnson down near Hattiesburg. So those are ones that we manage too. Parks manages the facility, but we do the lake. So it's great to be able to offer, to have those opportunities. I actually live in Copiah County now, and, I've got Calling Panther close by, so that's usually where I go. So it's great to have that resource available. So
at certain times of year, I'll see you in your boat out on Calling Panther.
Absolutely.
Brim fishing?
Bass fishing.
Bass fishing.
Bass
huh?
or crappie typically.
Okay. Attaboy. I just saw, mentioned Lamar Bruce, Lake Lamar Bruce, that in January, a new record crappie was caught there at Lake Lamar Bruce, just under 3 pounds, I think.
It was, and what we started that several years ago with a state lake record fish. So not a state record crappie, but each of our state lakes have a category: bass, crappie, bluegill, red ear, and catfish. So if you go out there and you catch a big one, you can see what the record is. It's either at our office or on our website, and you get a chance to break a new record. So kind of proud of that. It created some competition several years ago. Whenever we renovate one of our lakes, Lake Jeff Davis came to mind down near Prentice. There was a competition going on for the bass because we had back-to-back big bag, double-digit bass caught.
Really?
And they were calling the lake manager, come weigh my fish. So we send them a certificate, and we also put a framed copy at our office. We put it on the website, usually do a press release. So it's pretty neat.
Pretty cool. So for you personally, what's your personal best? Largemouth.
Largemouth, 8.9. I've caught 2 of them. I'm yet to break the double digit.
Okay. Where'd you catch them?
I caught that one at Calling Panther, both of them.
Both of them. 8.9. Same exact.
Same as that.
To the ounce.
Yep.
How about that?
So catfish was at 38-pound flathead.
Okay.
Hand grabbing. Crappie, just a little over 3 pounds. I caught it back at Charlie Caps when it was still a lake years ago.
Okay. You ever get to, talk to or do it yourself, the folks that like up at Sardis, they'll wade out in that waist deep water, those long jig poles. You've done that?
I've done it once, and it was fun. I did that with a friend of mine, Brett Harris. He fished a lot at Okeechobee. He's one of our employees, and he loved crappie fish at Okeechobee. So there was a section there that had some fluted timber, and he said he was going to try it. And I'm like, I've never done that. So I go to my shop and I break out my old waders from 15 years ago when I used to duck hunt in the Delta, thinking everything would be fine. And so I jump off in the water, and that water's still pretty chilly in March. And I found out I had a leak. But we caught enough fish that I ignored the cold water. But it was fun. It's a different style of fishing.
Sure.
You got a lot of limbs from the trees. You're not going to just set the hook and raise your jig pole up high. So, but it was a cool experience.
I think that's the thing that fascinates me. You look at the state of Mississippi, all the different bodies of water that are different. You could talk about how different, say, the Mississippi River versus a place like Bay Springs, deep, clear lakes. But the massive differences, people figure out ways to catch fish in different types of water, and the ingenuity that you see from folks and anglers around, whether it's, sticking that jig pole right back up in the bushes. Like I can't even see where he's dropping that jig, and he hoists out a crappie out of there. I would never, really on my own, think to do that. Anglers are really amazing in that respect, aren't they?
They are. Several years ago, we did a project. We called them lake depth maps, where we went out and took depth readings with GPS back when all of that was in its infancy. And we were able to make maps for anglers to put on our website. So finding creek channels and ledges and drop-offs really became important. And we also would put fish attractor locations. So as our biologists go out and put them at treetops or Christmas trees or something in the water, we would give the GPS coordinates. So that was very popular because especially if you move to a new area and you don't know much about that lake or have somebody to show you, at least you've got something there to see. But in the springtime, you're talking about crappie. That's one of the best experiences each spring I look forward to. I usually go to Barnett and get up in that grass, and you're fishing in 6 to 8 inches of water, trying to get that jig as far as you can up in there. There's nothing like feeling that thump.
That thump.
For the crappie. I
had a trip, this is many years ago, with a friend of mine he was an avid bass fisherman, but this was at Pickwick, and around March, April, maybe April, when they would move up on those, gravel banks, and he'd really get into the crappie fishing. He was using yellow line, the bright fluorescent line.
Yep.
And you mentioned the bump. It was so that because often he wouldn't be able to feel the strike. He would only be able to see it because they'd strike that jig coming back at him. So he'd see that line jump up in the air and knew he had a strike.
Well, the fluorescent line is wonderful, especially as you get older. I have found that to be true. I love to be able to see my line. So.
Yeah. Do people still like catch crappie though, like the old school ways? And when I say old school, okay, I'm like you. I was introduced to it by, a dad and a granddad. My dad, it was cane pole, man, and a cork and live minnows and just watching that cork all day.
My first experience, my dad worked for the railroad, and he had a friend that he worked with that used to fish at Lake Mary, down close to Woodville. And every spring he would go to Lake Mary crappie fishing, and he took me. So I think that was my first experience being in a boat, or especially one with a motor. And we went, and so the old ways I think of, with sculling, using the little sculling paddle, and you're easing up there. You're not trying to make any noise. You didn't have all the fancy sonar that you do these days, and all the different jig poles. But it was going in with probably jigs. I know they use minnows too. But going around, like all the cypress trees and Tupelo gums around the lake, and just finding them. So it was a lot of searching. And then once you found them, you just sit there and you could do really good. So.
Yeah, really cool. When you mentioned the electronics, and to anybody that's an avid fisherman, they can all speak to it. If you look over the last 15, 20 years, have we ever seen an innovation in fishing that has made that big of a difference in catch numbers? Not
like what we have now we call it live action sonar. Some people call it forward facing sonar. Kind of one of the name brands is the live scope has become extremely popular. And, each time something new comes out, it's a big deal. 15, 20 years ago, down imaging, different things was a big deal. But now that you can just sit there and watch the fish, and it doesn't mean they're going to bite. I've heard a lot of people say, I can tap them in the head and they won't bite. But to me, if you pull up on a site that you really think, and I'm one of those, I don't move around enough. I think a fish ought to be there, and I'm going to spend way too much time. At least I would know if the fish is there or not, and I'll move on to a different place.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been a game changer. And we're doing some studies up on the Big Four, Enid, Sardis, Grenada, and Archibutler, where our biologists are basically gathering information if you're using that or not, and comparing catch rates, looking at how long does it take people to catch fish that are using it versus not, whether they're still using what we call trolling, where, trolling became really popular in the early 2000s. So to see somebody up there with 5 or 6 poles on the front of their boat was the norm. And now what we're seeing is, as people are starting to use this new advanced sonar, they're going back to the single pole, and they're able to target specific fish versus just setting a bunch of lines out there
while trolling.
Yeah, so it's almost changing the way people fish. Just going back to that.
How about that?
So it's really interesting. So I don't know what would be next that would top this. What's coming 10 to 15 years from now.
Right.
It'll be really interesting.
And the way things are going, something will come along. We just not sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But trolling with one line in the water.
Well, trolling, when I say trolling, I mean if you're out there fishing with multiple poles.
Okay.
It's a spider rigging.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people call it.
Gotcha.
So we saw people going from the old days that you were talking about, where you're out there one, maybe 2 poles. The people fishing in those waters were putting, a lot of poles out on the front of their boat, fishing with minnows or jigs. And then once they started using the advanced sonar, and they can see the fish. They can tell whether that fish is a 2-pounder, 3-pounder. They can see that it's a larger crappie, and they can target those specific ones. So that's just one of the things that we're seeing with that study. So it's be interesting to see.
And that study's going on now?
It's going on now, yeah. We've done 2 lakes, I believe, Archibutler and Sardis, and they're just finishing up, working up the data for Enid, if I'm not mistaken.
A study like that, length of time to get what you need and then to kind of draw some conclusions, how long will that
These are what we call roving creels. So these are where the biologists, it's kind of like what we did with the hand grabbers. We're doing it by boat versus being at the boat ramp, interviewing anglers. So they're actually out there on the water while people are fishing. And they do that, I believe, 10 or 11 months out of the year. So they pick one lake and they do that lake for that year.
Okay.
Then they'll spend, the winter months working up the data. Then they'll do the next lake. So they can compile all that data and put it together to see. But, the first year they did it, I believe my biologist will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 25% of the crappie anglers were using it. The next year it was more like 50%. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people are starting to buy that.
Isn't that funny? Word spreads quickly, doesn't it?
It does.
When you're catching fish.
If you're able to catch a lot of fish, you want to do whatever it takes to get them.
Sure. No question about it. You mentioned the northern part of the state up there where I live, Pickwick. It being not just a smallmouth fishery, but like a smallmouth destination. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of put into perspective what a big deal that is, really, even for that area, even from a tourism perspective?
It's a really big deal because that's the only place you can go in our state to catch smallmouth. So I have yet to catch one. I've been up there 3 or 4 times and caught a lot of largemouth.
And some drum, I'm sure.
And went to Bay Springs and caught some, the big spots.
Yeah.
But smallmouth, it's definitely on my bucket list. I hope to get back up there soon to try it. But it's really neat. You can catch all 3 species of bass there. So really cool. Yeah. Part of that Tennessee River system.
Well, if you only had some connections with people who could, like a Larry Pugh or somebody.
Well, and that's who I went. But
right.
he did his best to put me on them. But and we had a great time. Caught a lot of fish, more fish than I typically would catch, myself. Yeah. But yet to get that smallmouth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a neat thing. That, and it's just such a neat place. The most recent time I was up there, this was maybe last year in the summer, was with a friend of ours, my wife's cousin who was up there, and he's jugging for catfish there in the middle of the summer. And that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And, it's a big open, in places there close to Bear Creek, another big open area, and really the only thing you got to watch out for is an occasional skier comes buzzing by. Right. But we had a good time doing that. It's just a really neat place. It's
a beautiful place. You got J.P. Coleman State Park right up there on the water. Got a hotel and cabins, nice boat ramp, parking lot big enough for the boats. You can even plug your battery charger in there at the parking lot. So just a great place.
So there's a battery charger at the boat.
If I'm not mistaken, they're in the parking lot.
In the parking lot.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, that's a new development.
They're going to fuss at me if I'm wrong. But
well, we can always go back and check it. It's really neat to talk to somebody like you who has been able to take that passion and turn it into the career that you've had, to this point. When you look at the overall health, which that's kind of what you do. I mean, you're looking at from border to border, east to west, all the way to the coast at our fisheries and sort of, we're coming off a year where we didn't have a lot of rain and that sort of thing. The overall health statewide, where are we right now?
Well, I think it's good. I think we're very blessed with the fisheries that we have across the state from one end to the other. So we talk about, J.P. Coleman being in the northeast part of the state, and then those big 4 flood control reservoirs in the north central part of the state. And then over on the western side, you've got all the oxbows, tons of oxbows, like Beulah Lake, Lake Washington, down to Eagle Lake, all the way down to Lake Mary and the river itself. Then scattered across the state are all the state park lakes and the state fishing lakes that we have. Then you get down toward the coast, you got a whole different environment down there with the Pascagoula River system and all of those oxbows. So, we're really blessed. You can go out and catch largemouth, spotted bass, crappie, brim, catfish, readily in our state. And not to mention all the streams you can wade. Sure. That's one of the things I've enjoyed doing the last few summers is just getting out on the creek and wading around with a little ultralight and a small spinnerbait catching spotted bass. It's a great time to spend just to get out and get a little exercise too.
Sure. Look, I did the same thing recently in recent years. Just for the first time, got a little bit into the ultralight thing. You know, as a young man, I want a big flipping stick, and that ultralight fishing, and some of these, you hit a stream like you're talking about, you don't know what you're going to catch. It could be one of any number of different species, and it's a lot of fun.
It is. Those little spotted bass, they can fight. So,
yes, sir.
If you got a lightweight, rod, just makes the action even more. You're not going to get the 8 and 10 pounders, of course, like you would in the lakes, but it's a blast.
It really is. No question. Well, it's great to talk to you, Jerry, and congrats on the career. And I know it's still ongoing, but you do such a great job. The whole department does, the Fisheries Bureau, and appreciate some time on the Mississippi Outdoors podcast.
Good to meet you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you all for watching Mississippi Outdoors podcast. I'm Matt Wyatt. Thanks to Jerry Brown for joining us, and we'll see you outdoors.